The Chicago Bears are currently over the salary cap for 2026. So Ryan Poles has to either cut some players or restructure some contracts between now and mid-March.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. On the show today, we're going to go through some players who would be strong candidates for the Bears to release, not necessarily because they're bad players, but just because they need the salary cap savings and could afford to go on without these players and maybe replace them with someone that's going to cost them less than their current contracts. So we'll start with linebacker Tremaine Edmunds, who's kind of the big number everyone talks about this offseason. Then we'll go through some other names who, whether you cut them, whether you trade them and get some value that way, you could save some money. And also you can start to add up some savings if you cut some smaller contracts that individually don't save you a lot, but collectively can clear up plenty of room to get under the salary cap and then create more space to sign outside free agents and re-sign some of your own free agents. I do want to thank you for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. But we spent a lot of time, not even just since the season's been over, but we've been anticipating for a while that Tremaine Edmunds will be a popular candidate to be a salary cap casualty this offseason. Now, up to this point, the Bears have given us no formal indication that that will be the case. They haven't even really talked around it. They just really have avoided the topic of Tremaine Edmunds' contract all throughout this process. So it's not like we've gotten a hint of like, oh, they've sounded like they're ready to move on or whatever. We haven't really heard much of that in particular. This is purely a financial conversation about Edmunds. And I guess in some part, a reflection of quality of play. Because I think for a lot of these salary cap casualty players that we're going to talk about, it's not simply the case that, oh, this player is bad, and so they should be released because you don't want them on your team anymore. It's specifically that you don't want them on your team at their current price tag. That, of course, if this player or these players were cheap and on, low-level veteran minimum contracts, well, of course, you would still want them around. They are talented players, but it becomes a question of, are they worth their salary to your team, as opposed to what you could get by getting that salary cap space back from releasing them and using that money elsewhere. And so that's what makes Tremaine Edmunds such a interesting candidate, because on his current contract, he is the third highest paid linebacker in the NFL in terms of the average per year salary on his contract, right? He's on a 4-year, $72 million contract is what the Bears signed him to a couple of seasons ago. That pays him $18 million a year. It's not, they structure it differently, so it's not always the exact same salary every year, but on average, 4 years, $72 million is $18 million per year. Only two linebackers in the NFL have contracts that average more money per year. Roquan Smith on his 5-year, $100 million contract with the Ravens, and then Fred Warner's on a 3-year, $63 million contract with the 49ers. So those guys are at $20 and $21 million a year. Tremaine Edmunds is third at $18 million a year. And we can have a variety of opinions on just how good or not Tremaine Edmunds is. Some people, I think, are bigger fans than others. I've been very underwhelmed by him. But even if you don't think Edmunds has been particularly troublesome, I don't think you'll find anybody who feels like he has played like the third best linebacker in the NFL. If indeed the third highest contract would signify you should be getting somewhere close to the third best linebacker play. Like, he's making more money than a number of linebackers who have played better football than him. Zach Bond of the Philadelphia Eagles, Nick Bolton from the Chiefs, Patrick Queen from the Steelers, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from the Cleveland Browns, and the list goes on and on. Literally all but three linebackers are making less money but two linebackers are making less money than Tremaine Edmunds. So as it stands, the way his contract is structured right now, if on the Bears roster in 2026, he is set to cost them $17.4 million against the salary cap. The way that the contract is structured, only about $2.5 million of that is guaranteed to go to Tremaine Edmunds. That no matter what, he is going to get about $2.5 million out of that $17.5 million that his salary cap hit is set to be. So the math there then is that if the Bears were to release Tremaine Edmunds, they would save $15 million in salary cap space. He would still count $2.5 million on their books because that's already been paid to him in guaranteed money. But they could release him and not pay him the remaining $15 million and then have that $15 million available to spend on whatever they want. Obviously, part of that $15 million and perhaps a significant portion of that $15 million would first have to go towards replacing Tremaine Edmunds in your defense. He is a starting linebacker who has played a lot of snaps for you and has been a leader in the middle of the defense. I don't think he's played particularly great, but has not been horrendous either, but has been closer to average, which is a problem when he's as highly paid as he is. But it's not like, oh my gosh, he's been so bad, you can't wait to get this guy out of here, but just more like he hasn't lived up to the contract the Bears gave him. So when you replace him, you do need to, if you release him, then you do need to replace him with someone competent here. Now, whether that's re-signing one of your own free agent linebackers in DeMarco Jackson and handing him the keys to the car, whether it's looking to an outside free agent. I mean, obviously, the more you spend to replace him, the less actual savings you will realize. Because if you cut Tremaine Edmunds, save $15 million, and then use that $15 million on a replacement linebacker, you would save $0. You would just have a different linebacker in there occupying roughly the same amount of salary. So I think the idea is that you replace him at a lower cost, but it's a question of who and what that lower cost is. You know, you could look to free agency for guys out there like, you know, there's some older veterans like Bobby Wagner, Levante David, even DeMario Davis, who used to play for Dennis Allen in New Orleans. You know, there's some, you know, younger guys that maybe aren't as proven, but are going to be a little bit cheaper, like a Leo Chenal from the Kansas City Chiefs or Kenneth Murray from the Dallas Cowboys. If Ben Johnson wants to reunite with a former Lion like Alex Anzalone, he's been a solid linebacker, like not spectacular, but just kind of solid. And maybe those guys cost you, you know, $6 or $7 million instead of the 17 that you're going to pay Tremaine Edmunds. So then you save, you know, let's make it around $7 million. Let's be generous because players end up costing maybe more than you think. You always think you're going to get a good deal, but then it costs you more. Let's say they need to spend $7 million on the new linebacker to replace Tremaine Edmunds. That leaves you then with $8 extra million in savings that you can then apply towards re-signing Kevin Byard, towards signing a different safety, towards signing pass rushers, towards trading for a pass rusher, right? There's a lot of different ways you can then take that money and move them around. And it feels like a fairly obvious move for the Bears to make at this point, just given the lack of production from Tremaine Edmunds and also how we saw this past season that for the most part, when he wasn't out there, when he was injured and missed a handful of games this season, there wasn't a humongous drop-off to the likes of DeMarco Jackson filling in for him, or guys like Jalen Reeves-Maybin come off the practice squad and do seemingly just fine, or Eamon Ogbongbemiga off the bench. Like they were definitely worse, at least, you know, the likes of Ogbongbemiga and Reeves-Maybin and Noah Sewell. I don't know about Jackson, but there was a drop-off when Edmunds left, but not like a $15 million drop-off. Like they can replace him with a cheaper player who might not be quite as good, but will be close enough to as good and cost half as much. Like you could get a player who is 75% as good as Tremaine Edmunds was this season, 80% as good for 50% of the cost. Like there's quite a significant savings and value to the franchise there to make that move, especially when, as we stand today, the Bears 2026 salary cap, you know, like financial sheet, they're over the salary cap right now by $5.3 million. Like all the contracts rolling over from last season where guys are costing more next year or this year than they did last year, the Bears are currently have $5 more million in salary than they're allowed to have for 2026, meaning when the new league year turns over, they have to get that number down. They have to clear space. And Tremaine Edmunds, releasing him would be a significant first step, but not the only step they need to do. Because even if you clear him, you clear $15 million, they're $5 over the cap. That leaves you now 10 under the cap to re-sign any of your free agents, let alone replace Tremaine Edmunds, sign draft picks. Like, they're going to have to clear more than just a Tremaine Edmunds salary slot. So we'll take a look at some of the other cap casualties the Bears could make, guys who could be candidates to be released or traded, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. So instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just make sure to file by February 28th to get that rate. So take taxes off of your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. I do want to thank you again for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. Whether it's your first time ever listening or it's your fifth time listening this week. I guess it's only Thursday, but you get the idea. We appreciate it every single time you tune in. And if you want to take your listening to the next level, be sure to check out the Locked On Bears Everydayers Club, where you can get access to an ad-free audio feed of the Locked On Bears podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's compatible with any of the major podcasting apps with no ads. You also get access to the Locked On Bears group chat in the Locked On Everydayers Club Discord server as well, just for listeners of this show. If you want to check it out, head to the website lockedonbears.supercast.com, and you can always find a link to that in the show notes for the podcast. But Tremaine Edmunds is the big, obvious salary that's easy to dump and save a lot of money and replace without too much of a headache. That one feels, I don't want to say automatic, because you never know how much the Bears really do like Tremaine Edmunds, but that one feels the easiest to pull the trigger on and say, boom, there's some instant savings. But you got to find some money somewhere else. And a lot of times, salary cap casualties hurt a little bit. You know, doesn't feel good to move on from a starting linebacker like Edmunds, who had 4 interceptions this past season, even though, you know, gave up a lot of catches in coverage, missed a lot of tackles. Like, there's plenty to not like about Edmunds, but still, losing talented players isn't always feeling like you're going in the right direction. And same thing may be true on offense. We got a couple guys who performed well, but is the salary space more valuable than keeping those players around? Like, when I start to look at the room for the most savings after Tremaine Edmunds, the next 2 names on the list are guys you'd like to keep potentially, but you could be talked into moving on from potentially. So Tremaine Edmunds being cut would save you $15 million. The next biggest savings would be Cole Kmet. He's going to cost you, if you keep him, you'll pay him $11.6 million against your salary cap. If you released or traded him, you would save $8.4 million in cap space. So that's $8.4 million that could go a long way. You wouldn't need to spend that much on a Cole Kmet replacement because he's your number 2 tight end. You could get a replacement for a couple $1 million and use most of that savings, again, elsewhere where you might need it. Same thing at running back with Swift. If you keep him, he will count $8.8 million against your salary cap this season. If you release or trade him, you would save $7.5 million against in salary cap space. The short version of that, the math on that is just basically, if you release or trade him, you no longer have to pay the non-guaranteed money. All you still have to pay him against your books is the guaranteed money, because technically you've already paid him the guaranteed money. You're just paying for it now. It's sort of a layaway type of thing. You gave it to him up front, but it doesn't count against your books until until future seasons of the contract. So both of those guys would be significant savings for the Bears, and more so than any other players on the roster not named Tremaine Edmunds. But it's a much harder conversation and debate about moving on from your former starting tight end, who still plays a really big role, and your current starting running back, who just had maybe the best season of his career. We've talked before on this podcast about how I do think a Cole Kmet trade would make more sense than a DJ Moore trade, in large part for this financial reason, but also some of the roster fit stuff. We talked about that, was it last week or 2 weeks ago on the podcast? Now you can go back and take a listen if you want more of the ins and outs on the Kmet versus DJ Moore trade debate there. But you can see where it's like, well, okay, if Kmet's a number 2 tight end anyway, and you'd save almost $8 million by getting rid of him. And if you trade him, you're getting something valuable in return, right? There's no world, in my view, where it would make sense to just cut Cole Kmet, just release him outright. He's too valuable and not crazy expensive enough to say, just cut him and take the savings. Almost certainly, some team somewhere would at least give you some kind of draft pick for Cole Kmet. And you could end up having a really good value for Cole Kmet in a trade. I mean, we don't know exactly what it would be worth. The salary has to work for the other team. And, we don't have to sit here today and figure out what exactly he would garner in a trade. But he's a starting caliber tight end who's 26, 27 years old. Like, he's valuable. He's too valuable to just outright release. The only salary saving conversation for Kmet is a trade. And whether that's trading up for a draft pick straight up, which would probably be a day 3 type of pick, fifth round type of thing is probably what we're looking at. But again, that's not the point of the discussion right now. That's the only, or you include him for a player, right? You send Kmet and draft picks for Max Crosby, that kind of thing, or even a lesser player, but still, like, the only way I'm getting rid of Cole Kmet is if I'm gaining something in return. DeAndre Swift is a little bit of a different story there. Also, someone I'm not eagerly just saying, yeah, get him out of here. I don't want this guy, because he ran well this season. Gave the Bears one of the better running attacks in football and had one of the best years of his career. Like, I don't think he's going to have a astronomical trade value because running backs in general don't have a trade value. And at his current salary, it's not like he's one of these super high paid running back. Like, he's right in that middle class. Like, guys like Barkley and McCaffrey and Derrick Henry and even Jonathan Taylor, like, they're getting twice as much as what DeAndre Swift is getting right now. Like, he's not like one of these, it's not like Tremaine Edmunds where he's at the top of the salary structure and you're just not getting top level play from him. Like, Swift is in the middle of the salary table and you're getting middle. Like, I think he is playing well enough to justify his salary. The question with DeAndre Swift is, could you use the savings from releasing him to get a replacement player who is close to as good and still have money left over to help you add better players elsewhere? Like, part of this conversation is like, how much do the Bears trust Kyle Monangai? Do they see him as someone who could be the number 1 running back next year and you could cut DeAndre Swift and get a really cheap backup to go with him and save a bunch of money at running back? Or alternatively, do they just say, well, we like DeAndre Swift, but looking at other free agent running back and think this guy would be a better scheme fit for what we want to do? And again, I don't think there's like an obvious guy who would be cheaper and be a better fit. Because like, if you cut DeAndre Swift, you're not going to get Breece Hall for a lower price. You're not going to get Kenneth Walker for a lower price. Those two guys for sure are going to get more money as a free agent now than what you would be paying DeAndre Swift. You would not save money by releasing Swift and going and getting Ken Walker or Breece Hall in particular. Beyond them, you can start to talk into the savings for pretty much any other running back, but it's hard to get a sense of exactly what the value is going to be for like Rachaad White of the Buccaneers or Javonte Williams from the Cowboys. So I know Travis Etienne has been a popular name that's been loosely tied to the Bears because of the Press Taylor familiarity there. But like, it's very possible someone like Etienne could get, $8 million, and that's about all you were going to save from DeAndre Swift. So now you're not saving any money. You're just putting a different running back in there. And is that really an upgrade, or is it just a lateral move? At what point, is that really worth it? So like, I think the only way I move on from DeAndre Swift is if I get to free agency and I can call up and talk to one of these free agent running backs, like, I don't know, J.K. Dobbins from the Broncos. He's not even the best scheme fit example here. I'm just thinking like that caliber of running backs out there. Maybe Brian Robinson from the 49ers, Rico Dowdle from the Panthers. Like, if any of these guys are like cheap because running back market dries up, Hall and Walker get the big money and then no one else wants to pay. Like, if I could get Rico Dowdle for $3 million, a slight raise of what he was paid this year, which he's going to try and get more and probably will get more. But say the market dries up and he's, the musical chairs is sitting around with nowhere else to go. If I could get someone like, again, I'm going to use Dowdle as just an example, but maybe not the point, but like someone like Dowdle for $3 million, I could cut DeAndre Swift, save $8 million, spend $3 million of that on Dowdle and have $5 million more to go spend on a pass rusher, a linebacker, a safety, etc. Like, that to me might start to feel a little bit more worth it. Or maybe, I guess, possibility you go through the NFL draft and Jeremiah Love's not going to make it to where you pick, but say in the second round or whatever, there's a running back you absolutely love and you draft him and say, okay, between him and Monangai, we'll be fine. So then you cut DeAndre Swift. That'd be kind of crappy to Swift to do it that late in the process. I don't think they necessarily would, but the point being, there's some alternatives. There's some alternative ways to boost the running back position without spending a lot of money, but I would need to be certain I'm doing that before I'm for sure releasing DeAndre Swift just for the sake of releasing DeAndre Swift. But you do got to find money somewhere if you're not going to trade Kmet and you're not going to release DeAndre Swift. There are some other players on the roster that are lower on the depth chart that you could release, and individually, none of them are going to save you big bucks, but if you release 2 or 3 or 4 of them, all of a sudden that adds up to $10, $12, $15 million in savings. So we'll look at a variety of some of the smaller names that the Bears might consider releasing if they just need to find a little extra savings here and there. That's next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for the events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following the winter games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports that you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. Whether it's the drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get intense fast, or speed skating races decided by inches, hockey games that feel different right from the opening faceoff, even those niche events become must-watch when you're totally locked into the competition. I've been really enjoying the biathlon, where they ski downhill as fast, or even cross-country ski as fast as they can, then lay down, shoot rifles at a target while their heart's beating 1,000 miles an hour, and get back up and ski the rest of the race. It's crazy, and I love watching it. And having FanDuel helps keep the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel, play your game. So Edmunds, and then maybe Kmet and Swift are kind of the big fish for the Bears to consider. There are a number of smaller fish they may also consider that aren't going to make the big time moves, but a small savings here and there that can absolutely add up to much more to help clear some extra room for the Bears. And I should briefly throw in the idea here that there are a couple other players that you would save a little bit of money cutting. For example, you could cut Montez Sweat and save $7 million. You could cut Jalen Johnson and save $6.5 million. You could cut Jonah Jackson and save $5.5 million. The Bears are not going to just release Montez Sweat, Jalen Johnson, or Jonah Jackson. And more importantly, they wouldn't be able to replace those guys with anything of quality for the amount of money they would save. You can't replace Montez Sweat for $7 million. You can't really replace Jalen Johnson for $6.5 million. Maybe you could replace Jonah Jackson for $5.5 million, but you don't really want to tinker with the construction of this offensive line right now that's finally playing some good football. So yes, there are other players that technically do have potential savings available, but they're not realistic. Like Swift and Kmet are at least a conversation. There's no conversation about Sweat, Johnson, and really Jonah Jackson in there either. But some other guys who do belong in the conversation that not huge savings, but you could talk yourself into saying, hey, you could release that guy, save that money, and replace him with someone who's cheaper and get some net positive in there. The next biggest cap savings on my list here would be Tyreek Stevenson. Entering the last year of his rookie contract, he will cost you $4 million this year. And if he's in the Dennis Allen doghouse and he couldn't really start over Nashawn Wright and wasn't really rotating in that much, and even when they had injuries there, he still wasn't playing full-time, if they just decide, screw it, the Tyreek Stevenson experiment is over, they could save $3.6 million by releasing him. So you keep him, you pay $4 million. If you release him, you save $3.6 million out of that. And then you could replace him with another Nashawn Wright off of the street for $1.1 million and still have an extra $2.5 million in savings just by not bringing Stevenson back. Like if you're going into 2026 saying, this is a backup who's not going to play for us anyway, why pay your backup cornerback $4 million when you could find another backup cornerback for half or a quarter of that price who will play just as much? You know, like if they think Stevenson is going to compete to start and is in the plans for 2026, for sure, keep him. Like $4 million for a starting cornerback is cheap. That's good value if he's a starter. It's not as good value if he is a backup there. Same thing at kicker with Cairo Santos. Like, you could cut Cairo Santos and save $2.6 million. He missed some kicks last season. He has missed some kicks the last couple of seasons. I think other people are a little bit more anti-Cairo Santos than I am at this stage of the process. But, like, it's not hard to look at it and say he hit 83% of his field goals this year and 84 last year. Like, it's not like it was just 1 year of a blip here or there. But now it's been multiple seasons where, at least in terms of overall kicking accuracy, like, that is below average. This past season, he was 25th in field goal percentage. And the year before that, he ranked 22nd in field goal percentage in both years, at or below the league average for kickers in field goal percentage. And as we know, doesn't have the strongest leg, can't consistently hit the deep ones. So, like, I could see the Bears saying, Santos, we liked you, but we're going to go in a different direction, save a little money. You could use that $2.6 million to sign a cheap kicker and still have some savings left over. I don't necessarily anticipate that will be their approach. They may bring in some kicker competition. I'm not sure they're going to release him, but it's definitely a possibility there. And then I'd also throw in quickly Roshan Johnson as a player who isn't making a ton of money, but you could save $1.1 million by releasing him. And if he's your number 3 or number 4 running back, maybe you go and get somebody cheaper and use that $1.1 million in savings just elsewhere on your roster. One other name that I've seen Bears fans throw out there that would save you some money but doesn't make a lot of sense for me to release is backup quarterback Tyson Bagent. He's set to cost $4.75 million this year. If you release him, you would save $3.75 million. And, like, sure, technically speaking, yes, you could find a cheaper backup quarterback than Tyson Bagent using that money you save by releasing Tyson Bagent. But you are paying Tyson Bagent almost $5 million because of how good of a backup quarterback he has been. They gave him that contract extension, gave him a raise because there's a certain level of trust that if Bagent has to come in a game for whatever reason, that he can hold down the fort. Not that he's going to be just as good as Caleb Williams and lead you to the playoffs or whatever, but, like, in a pinch, you like Bagent as one of the better backup quarterbacks with some upside. So, like, I think you are getting your money's worth paying Bagent the money you're paying him. And even though you could find savings by releasing him, I would rather have that money invested in Tyson Bagent than release him and try and bring in a new backup quarterback that I probably trust a bit less. And you feel like, man, if that guy has to go in the game, we are absolutely screwed. Like, yeah, there's cheaper options out there. They could go get Jake Browning or Sam Howell or Skylar Thompson or Gardner Minshew, but none of those guys make you feel good. And I think we got a good thing here in Bagent that we should cherish a little bit more and not just be so quick to release. But, like, you could see where if you start to release a combination of these guys, you could throw Josh Blackwell in there, good special teams player, but making $2.5 million this year. You could save $2 million by releasing him. You could save $2 million by releasing linebacker Eamon Onbog-Mamiga. Like, you save $2 million there, $2 million here, $3 million there, $1 million here. And I just was throwing out numbers and not counting in my head, but that's $10 million. I think 3-2-2-1 would be, no, that'd be $8 million. See, math's hard for me. That'd be $8 million in savings right there. Like, releasing 4 of those guys is the same amount of money that you would save by trading Cole Kmet, for example. Like, all of a sudden, you can find ways to fill in some of the gaps in terms of salary cap space with some of these smaller moves adding up instead of making all of the, like, the big splash of getting rid of really good players. That's going to be hard to replace. It's a lot easier to replace the Josh Blackwell and Eamon Onbog-Mamigas of the world than it is to find new Cole Kmets and DeAndre Swift around every corner. Of course, not all of the Bears' savings has to come from players being outright released. A significant portion of where the Bears will create salary cap this offseason will be from taking current contracts on the roster and restructuring them. Now, it's kind of a complicated concept or process to explain, but you move the money around on the books into the future and all of a sudden create more room now by saying, I'll gladly pay you next Tuesday for the hamburger today. I forget what that's an old cartoon line from 50 years before I was born. But if you give me the hamburger, I'll gladly pay you next Tuesday. Like, that's kind of the idea for the contract restructures. And I want to take some time to go through which players would make the most sense to restructure and what some of the pros and cons are of doing that, because you don't want to get too crazy pushing all your bills in the future because you're going to have to pay them eventually. So we'll take some time to go through that on tomorrow's Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Be sure to check out the Locked On Bears Everydayers Club if you want to have access to an ad-free audio feed. Again, the website is lockedonbears.supercast.com. Otherwise, you can keep tuning in the same way you always do. We're free and available on all platforms. We're not going behind a paywall or anything like that. And we'll always make sure that each time you tune in to Locked On Bears, you're going to get another opportunity to bear down.